The bank called on a Thursday morning while I was watering my roses. Not a collection call, a courtesy call. The kind where the voice is professional and careful and says things like, "We just want to make sure you're aware," before it says the thing that stops you from moving. The woman said, "Mrs. Ellison, this is regarding the Coastal Credit account ending in 4471. The payment due October 3rd has not been received. We want to make sure everything is all right on your end." I said, "I'm sorry, which account?" She gave me the number again. I wrote it down on the back of a seed catalog. I said, "I don't have an account with Coastal Credit." A pause. She said, "The account was opened in August. The primary holder is listed as Margaret Ann Ellison. Social Security ending in..." She read me the last 4 digits of my Social Security number, my own number. I said, "I need to call you back." I set down the watering can. I went inside. I sat at the kitchen table where my son Lucas had eaten dinner the night before. Pot roast, his favorite, the one I make when he looks tired. And I opened my laptop. 4 accounts, 4 banks, 14 months, $48,000. All in my name. All with my Social Security number. All with a signature that looked enough like mine that no one had questioned it. I closed the laptop. I picked up my phone, and I did not call Lucas. I called my accountant. "My name is Margaret Ellison. I am 58 years old. I am a retired office manager. 31 years at the same medical practice. I know how paperwork works. I know how records work. I know what a signature on a document means and what it costs when someone puts your name on something without your knowledge. I raised Lucas alone from the time he was 11. His father left, and I did not fall apart because falling apart was not an option when you have a child who needs lunch packed and homework checked and the light left on at night. Lucas is 38 years old. He runs a small landscaping business that has been struggling for 3 years. I knew it was struggling because he told me, not the details, not the numbers, just that things were tight and that he was working on it. I believed him because he is my son, and because I wanted to believe him. And because wanting to believe someone is not the same as knowing what they are doing. I know that now. I did not know it on the Thursday morning when the bank called about an account I had never opened. The accountant's name is Frank. He has handled my taxes for 12 years. He is not dramatic. He is precise. I called him that Thursday and told him what the bank had said. Frank said, "Margaret, pull your credit report. All 3 bureaus. Do it now while we're on the phone." I pulled them. 4 accounts, Coastal Credit, First National Online, Hartford Community Bank, Riverside Credit Union. Frank said, "When were they opened?" I read him the dates. August, September, November, February. He was quiet for a moment. Frank said, "Margaret, someone has been using your identity to open credit lines. The pattern, 4 accounts across 14 months. This was not an accident. This was methodical." I looked at the dates again. August was Lucas's slow season. September was when he told me the business needed new equipment. November was when he asked if I would co-sign a loan. I had said no, gently, because I was on a fixed income and could not take on the risk. February was 3 weeks after I said no for the second time. I did not say any of this to Frank. I said, "What do I do?" Frank said, "Freeze your credit. All 3 bureaus. Today. And Margaret, do you have any idea who might have had access to your personal information?" I looked at the seed catalog on the table. My Social Security number written on the back in my own handwriting. I said, "I need to think about it." Frank said, "Take the time you need, but freeze the credit today." I froze it. Then I made a list. Not of suspects, of Sundays. Lucas had come to dinner every Sunday for 14 months. Pot roast, chicken, pasta. His favorites, rotating. He always arrived at 6. He always brought wine. He always asked about my garden. He always hugged me at the door when he left. 14 months of Sundays. $48,000. I thought about when he might have had access to my Social Security number. The answer came quickly. 3 years ago, when his business was first struggling, I had helped him fill out a loan application. A real one, with my blessing, that he had ultimately not pursued. I had written my information on a worksheet at his kitchen table. He had kept the worksheet. I sat with that for a long time. Then I made a second call. Not to the police, not yet. To a consumer protection attorney named Susan, who had been recommended by Frank. Susan said, "Do not confront him yet. Document everything first. Every account, every date, every amount. Pull the actual loan applications if the banks will send them. Then we talk about next steps." I documented everything. It took me 4 days. 4 days of Sundays passing in my memory while I built a folder that would end them. If you have ever kept doing something that felt like love while you were finding out what it was actually covering, you already know why this story exists. Subscribe and hit the bell. I'll be here every week. The folder had 5 tabs. Tab 1. Credit reports from all 3 bureaus, printed and highlighted. Tab 2. Account opening documents from each of the 4 banks. 3 of the 4 had provided them after I submitted identity theft claims. The signatures on every application were not mine. Close enough that a clerk processing a form online would not have questioned them. Not close enough that anyone who knew my handwriting would have believed them for a second. Tab 3. The timeline. 14 months of dates, account openings, amounts borrowed, payments made, partial, irregular, just enough to keep the accounts from flagging. And the Sunday dinners in between, noted in my own calendar with one-word descriptions. Pot roast, chicken, pasta, wine he brought. Tab 4. Documentation of my Social Security number. Where I had written it. When. The loan worksheet from 3 years ago that I had given him at his kitchen table, thinking I was helping him start something real. Tab 5. Susan's letter. A formal demand for cessation of fraudulent activity, preservation of all related records, and a reimbursement schedule. Not yet sent. Waiting. I built the folder over 4 days. I did not call Lucas during those 4 days. He called me twice. I answered both times. The first call. Lucas said, "Hey, Mom, you okay? You seemed quiet at dinner." I said, "Just tired. Garden is keeping me busy." Lucas said, "Okay, call me if you need anything." I said, "I will." The second call, Lucas said, "Mom, I've been thinking, there's a new opportunity with the business. I might need some help with a deposit. Nothing big." I was quiet for a moment. I said, "Let's talk about it Sunday." Lucas said, "Yeah? Okay, great." He did not know I had the folder. He thought Sunday was going to be pot roast. I did not wait for Sunday. Susan had advised me to choose a time when I was calm, when we were alone, and when I had everything in front of me. She had advised against public places and against having other family present. I called Lucas on Monday evening. I said, "Can you come Tuesday morning? 10 o'clock? I need help with something in the house." Lucas said, "Of course. Is everything okay?" I said, "Yes. See you at 10. He arrived at 10, on time. He always arrives on time. He came through the front door. Lucas said, "Morning, Mom. What needs fixing?" I said, "Kitchen." He followed me in. He sat in his usual chair. I poured coffee. I sat across from him. I placed the folder on the table between us. He looked at the folder. He looked at the tabs. He looked at me. I said, "Open it." He opened to the first tab. He read for 40 seconds. His face did not change immediately. It changed slowly. The way faces change when a person is deciding whether to try a version of the situation that still allows them to leave the room without a full accounting. He already knew what was there. I said, "January, $14,200, First National Online. My name, my Social Security number, my signature." Lucas said, "Mom." I kept my eyes on the folder. I said, "March, $11,000, Coastal Credit Services, same method." Lucas said, "I can explain." I raised one hand. I said, "July, $16,400, Hartford Community Bank." Lucas said, "Please." I looked up. I said, "October, $6,400, Riverside Credit Union. Silence. He looked at the table. I looked at him. I said, $48,000, Lucas. He closed his eyes. I said, $48,000 in my name, across 14 months, while you came to Sunday dinner, while you brought wine, while you asked about my garden, while you told me everything was fine. Lucas said, I was going to pay it back. 3 words that carry a specific weight. I was going to. I looked at my son, 38 years old, sitting in the same chair where he had done homework at 11. I said, when? Lucas said, when the business stabilized, I had a plan. I said, you had a plan for the first one? Lucas said, yes. I said, and the second? Lucas said, the first one wasn't enough. I said, and the third? Lucas said, the plan was taking longer than I thought. I said, and the fourth, the one that dropped my credit score 41 points, the one the bank called me about on Thursday. Lucas looked at the table. Lucas said, the payment got delayed. And then I was afraid to tell you, and the longer I waited. I finished for him. I said, the easier it was to keep waiting. Lucas said, yes. A long silence. I said, Lucas, look at me. He looked up. His eyes were red. I said, you forged my signature 4 times. You opened $48,000 in credit in my name. You did this while sitting at my table and asking about my garden. And 3 weeks ago you called me and asked me to co-sign another loan. Lucas said, I know. I said, what did you think was going to happen? Lucas said, I thought I would fix it before you found out. I looked at my son. I looked at the folder between us. I said, turn to tab 5. He turned to tab 5. He read Susan's letter. I watched his face move through everything the letter contained. The formal language, the reimbursement schedule, the legal framework, the alternative if he chose not to cooperate. Lucas said, you got an attorney? I said, I got an attorney 4 days ago, the same day Frank helped me pull the credit reports. I have also filed identity theft reports with all 4 banks and with the Federal Trade Commission. The banks have flagged the accounts. Susan is holding the demand letter pending this conversation. Lucas said, Mom. I said, I am telling you what I have done so you understand where we are, not to punish you, to show you that I have not been sitting still. He was quiet for a moment. Lucas said, are you going to press charges? I sat with that question for a long time, not because I did not know the answer, because the answer required me to hold 2 true things at the same time, that this was my son and that what he had done was a crime, and to speak both of them clearly without letting one cancel the other. I said, that depends on you, and on what happens next. If this moment stayed with you, leave me a comment. Has someone you loved ever done something that required you to hold love and accountability at the same time? Tell me how you managed it. I read every single one. Lucas did not leave that Tuesday without a plan. Not the kind he had been building for 14 months. A real one. Susan met with both of us the following week. Lucas retained his own attorney. A young woman named Claire, who was direct and who understood, I think, that her client's best outcome required his full cooperation rather than a defensive posture. The reimbursement agreement was finalized over 3 weeks. Lucas committed to a structured repayment schedule, monthly, documented, verified against the outstanding balances on all 4 accounts. He also committed to complete transparency about the business finances for the duration of the repayment period. Frank would review the numbers quarterly. The identity theft reports with the banks were settled. The accounts were closed. My credit score began recovering in the 2nd month. I did not press criminal charges. This was my decision, and I made it with full understanding of what it meant. The legal exposure was real. What Lucas had done was wire fraud and identity theft, and a prosecutor would have had no difficulty building a case. Susan had been clear about this. I chose a different path because Lucas cooperated completely. Because he did not minimize or deflect or try to construct a version of events where what he had done was something smaller than what it was. He sat across from Claire in Susan's conference room and accounted for every dollar with the specific shame of someone who has finally run out of space between what they did and who they believed they were. That accounting mattered to me. The Sunday dinners stopped for 4 months. This was my decision also, not as punishment, as clarity. I needed to know what Sunday dinner actually was before I invited it back. Was it the relationship I had believed it to be, or had it been, for 14 months, a performance maintained because it was easier than a conversation? Lucas called every week during those 4 months. I answered every call. The calls were different from before. No wine referenced, no garden questions, shorter, more honest. The kind of conversations that happen when the comfortable version of a relationship has been removed, and what is left is the actual relationship, whatever that turns out to be. In the 5th month, I invited him for dinner. Not pot roast, something simpler. He arrived at 6. He did not bring wine. He sat down and he said, "I don't know how to thank you for not—" I said, "Don't thank me yet. The first payment is due on the 3rd. He looked at me for a moment. Then he almost smiled. The real one, the one I recognized from when he was 11. Lucas said, "It will be there." I said, "I know it will." We had dinner. It was quiet and honest, and nothing like the 14 months that had preceded it. That is where we are now. I am 58 years old, and my son forged my name on 4 loan documents over 14 months and came to Sunday dinner every week in between. I want to tell you the things that are actually true rather than the things that are easy. The first thing, love does not protect you from the people who have it for you and are also drowning. Lucas did not stop loving me during those 14 months. He was in a financial situation that had grown past what he could manage, and his response to that situation was to make a series of decisions that caused me direct harm while he sat at my table and asked about my roses. Both of those things were true simultaneously. Love was present. Harm was also present. They did not cancel each other out. The second thing, documentation is not a betrayal. Building that folder felt, for the 4 days I built it, like something I was doing against my son, like an act of opposition rather than protection. It was not. It was the thing that made an honest resolution possible. Without the folder, there was only accusation and denial, and the particular fog of a family conflict where no one can prove anything, and the strongest argument wins. The folder gave us a place to start from that was not fog. It was the ground we needed to have a real conversation. The third thing is harder to say. I spent 14 months making pot roast for a man who was committing a crime against me every few months. I did not know this. I am not responsible for not knowing it. What I think about is the 2 times he called to ask for loans, and I said no. I said no gently, with explanations, with apologies for my circumstances. I was managing his feelings about a request he had made of me, a request that, it turned out, he had already stopped making because he had found a method that did not require my permission. I do not know if saying no differently would have changed anything. I do not know if saying it with more directness, with less management of his feelings, would have interrupted the pattern earlier or later, or not at all. What I know is that the conversation we had on Tuesday, the one with the folder, was the first conversation between us in a very long time where I did not manage how he felt about what I was saying. I said what was true. I showed him what I had found. I let him sit with it without smoothing it. That conversation was the first one that actually helped. Say the true thing, even when it is hard, even when the person across the table is someone you made pot roast for every Sunday for 38 years. The true thing is the only thing that leads anywhere worth going. Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and protecting your relationship with someone you love? And which moment stayed with you longer, opening the credit report or watching his face when he opened tab 5? I read every single one. If this story reached you today, subscribe. What comes next will stay with you too. Margaret Ellison, Phoenix, Arizona.